At 9:40 in the morning on July 20-5th, 1940- for the summer sky over Normandy was deceptively clear. 2 miles south of Saint-Minus, low along the Purriers Road, the air felt heavy, almost solid, weighing down on the countryside. Lieutenant General Fritz Berle, in one of Nazi Germany's most seasoned armored commanders, stood outside his field headquarters. At that moment, he could not have known that the next 90-6 hours would become the single most terrifying nightmare of his life. He was about to witness not a conventional battle, but a collision between flesh and blood and the unyielding force of industrial annihilation. As the horizon began to darken with swarms of aircraft and the drone of thousands of engines drowned out his own thoughts. To truly grasp the magnitude of this catastrophe, we must first understand the victim of this tragedy, the Panzer Lehr Division. In the German military hierarchy of 1940-, for the word Lehr carried a weight of immense prestige and importance. It translates to teaching or demonstration, meaning this was not a unit of conscripts thrown together to fill a gap in the line. Its cadre was formed from the instructors, tactical masters, and technical experts of Germany's armored warfare schools. These were the men who taught others how to fight, as every tank commander, every gunner, and every driver was a true specialist. They could diagnose a Maybach engine by sound alone and execute complex tactical maneuvers on instinct without hesitation. They were the elite of the elite, a trump card held in reserve by Hitler to crush the Allied invasion completely. Berle in himself was the embodiment of this unit's soul, and at 40-5 years old, he carried the cold professionalism of a Prussian officer. He had served as chief of staff to the Desert Fox Sir Win Rommel in North Africa and knew the harsh realities of war. He had led troops out of the Soviet encirclement at Kirovarjad on the Eastern Front, defying Hitler's orders to stand and die. He wore the Knight's Cross with oak cleaves and carried the scars of 20-7 years of soldiering on his body. He believed he had seen the face of hell, but he was wrong, as he was about to stare into a void far deeper than hell itself. When the division was formed in France earlier that year, Heinz Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg, inspected them personally. Their equipment was lavish, even luxurious by wartime standards, while other German divisions relied on horses or walking infantry. Panzer Lehr was fully mechanized, possessing nearly 200 arc tanks, including Tiger IIs and Panthers. Every single one of their grenadier battalions rode in armored half-tracks and like the standard infantry units. This was a beast bred for speed for maneuver for the lightning war, yet fate had played a cruel joke on the steel monster. This steel monster was now trapped in the bocage of Normandy, a claustrophobic maze of ancient hedgerows and sunken lanes. In this terrain, long-range cannons were useless, and heavy armor became a liability against close-range ambushes. As the June landings, they had been bleeding out in a stalemate, fighting inch by inch across the unforgiving landscape. But across the Channel, Allied command had tired of this war of attrition, and General Lohmar Bradley devised a plan to break the deadlock. He devised a plan to break the deadlock not with tactics, but with physics, and this operation was codenamed Operation Cobra. The plan was terrifyingly simple, stating that if the ground cannot be taken, then the ground itself must be removed entirely. They designated a rectangular carpets, X kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, right over the heart of the Panzer Lehr assembly area. To achieve this, the Allies assembled one of the greatest armades in history, 1,500 heavy bombers, including B-17 flying fortresses. Supported by 1,000 medium and fighter bombers, nearly 3,000 aircraft carrying over 4,000 tons of high explosives and napalm. It was not just an air raid, it was a conveyor belt of death established in the sky to deliver continuous destruction. On that morning of July 20-5th, the rain that had shielded the Germans for days finally stopped. As the first low hum turned into a deafening roar, Berle and looked up to see a sight that defied belief. The sky was no longer blue. It had turned silver with the sheer number of polished metal wings blocking out the view. The bomber formation stretched from horizon to horizon, blocking out the sun and casting a giant shadow over the earth. When the first bomb fell, the world seemed to mute for a split second before the earth was torn apart. For the next hour, explosives rained down with the intensity of a tropical storm, unrelenting and fierce. Within that box of death, tons of ordnance detonated every single second, creating a continuous wall of fire. For the German soldiers on the ground, the experience transcended fear and entered the realm of psychological disintegration. These were veterans, men who knew the sound of artillery, but this was different, as the ground did not just shake. It rolled like the ocean as 60-ton Panther tanks were flipped like toys, tossed into the air by the sheer force of the blast. Landing upside down, their tracks, spinning helplessly, massive craters opened up, swallowing half-tracks and burying men alive. The most terrifying aspect was not the shrapnel flying through the air, but the immense invisible pressure. The simultaneous detonation of thousands of bombs sucked the oxygen out of the air, creating a massive vacuum effect. Soldiers hiding in bunkers safe from the fragments found their lungs ruptured instantly or their internal organs liquefied by the shockwave. They died without a mark on their bodies, while the air smelled of sulfur, burning flesh and pulverized rock. Daylight was extinguished by a cloud of dust so thick it turned noon into midnight. Even the Americans were not spared the horror of this display due to the unpredictability of the wind. Bombs drifted, falling on the U.S. 30th Infantry Division, killing hundreds of their own men, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair. If the attackers were rambling, one could only imagine the apocalypse unfolding within the German lines. When the last bomber finally turned for home, the dust began to settle, the survivors emerged into a world they did not recognize. The lush hedgerows, the farmhouses, the roads, everything was gone, and in their place was a moonscape of churning earth. Wehrmacht crawled from his command post, desperate to contact his regiments, but the radio offered only static. The lines were cut, and the silence that followed was heavier than the explosions. In his memoirs, he noted that 70% of his troops were effectively casualties. Survivors wandered the craters like zombies, eyes hollowed, ruling their minds shattered by a level of violence the human brain was not designed to process. But the nightmare was only beginning, as the bombing was merely the hammer, and now came the anvil. If the survivors of Panzer Lehr thought the silence meant safety, they were gravely mistaken. From the north, a new sound emerged, the deep guttural roar of American Sherman, answering the tramp of thousands of infantrymen. This was the cold logic of Operation Cobra, and the enemy pulverize him and then drive over him before he wakes up. However, the battlefield held a dark irony, as the bombing had been so thorough that it destroyed the very roads the Americans needed. The craters that swallowed the Germans now blocked the Allied tanks, buying the remnants of Panzer Lehr a fleeting moment of time. Wehrmacht, like a lion trapped in a burning cage, tried to rally his forces amidst the absolute chaos of the destruction. He sped through the ruins on a motorcycle, but found only graveyards of steel, where his division used to be positioned. The main road from St. Lo to Perriers was a corridor of death, littered with the twisted remains of war machines. Overturned tanks and shredded personnel carriers littered the path, as the Panzer Grenadiers, feared across Europe, had been vaporized. Yet amidst this apocalypse, the Lehr instinct, that ingrained professionalism, flickered one last time in the hearts of the survivors. In the ruins near the village of Le Desert, isolated crews of Panther tanks and assault guns began to fight back. This was the final stand of the condemned, as they used the craters as foxholes, turning their immobilized tanks into bunkers. When the American vanguard pushed through the dust, they were met with high-velocity 70-5mm shells from the ruins. For a brief moment, the Germans turned the cratered wasteland into a kill zone, knocking out Shermans and blocking the advance. It was a display of tactical brilliance, but it was futile, as the Americans did not need to duel these remnants. The moment a German tank fired, the sky would darken again, as the air support was called in immediately. P-40-7 Thunderbolts, the dreaded JAB-OS, swooped down like birds of prey. Rockets and heavy bombs obliterated the remaining German positions. Where air power could not reach M-12, self-propelled artillery smashed them from miles away, as this was not a battle of maneuver. It was an industrial clean-up operation, and by the evening of July 20-6:30, 6 hours after the bombing began, Panzer Lehr was effectively cut in half. Wehrmacht reported using a captured American radio frequency because his own were destroyed, stating simply, "My division is gone." By July 20-8, the American Third Army, under General Patton, poured through the breach in the German line had snapped. The retreat that followed was a scene of utter degradation as the roads to the southeast became a slaughterhouse. By day, Allied fighter bombers hunted down anything that moved, while by night French resistance fighters turned every forest into a trap. The pride of the division, the Tiger IIs and Panthers, were abandoned by their crews as fuel ran dry and blown up by their own men. The roadsides were lined with burning trucks and the charred remains of horses and men, a corridor of death visible for miles. During the clean-up, American engineers discovered something that serves as the most chilling epitaph for the Panzer Lehr. They found German tanks sitting in the fields, outwardly pristine, their armor unpierced and seemingly ready for battle. But inside, the crews were dead at their stations, as blood had run from their ears and noses. They had been killed instantly by the concussion of the massive bombs landing nearby. The steel meant to protect them had become their tombs, unable to shield them from the physics of modern destruction. By July 20-9, 6 hours after the first bomb fell, the Panzer Lehr Division had ceased to exist as a fighting force. In 4 days, a unit of 15,000 men had suffered over 7,000 casualties, losing half their strength. They lost nearly all of their 200 tanks and 600 half-minus tracks, leaving them with nothing but dust. Wehrmacht survived to retreat, but he led a column of ghosts, men who were hollow shells of their former selves. The destruction of Panzer Lehr changed the war in the West, altering the course of history forever. It tore the hole in the German lines that allowed the Allies to sweep across France like an unstoppable flood. But more than that, it shattered the Wehrmacht's faith in its own superiority and their belief in ultimate victory. The German commanders realized that no amount of tactical genius could stand against the total air supremacy of the Allies. The era of the blitzkrieg of the romanticized armored duel died forever in the deep craters of Normandy. Fritz Wehrmacht lived out the rest of his life in the shadow of those 90-6 hours, haunted by the memories. He knew deep in his soul that he had witnessed the end of an era and the birth of a new terrifying warfare. Today, if you walk through the quiet fields south of St. Minus, lo, the craters are mostly gone, filled in by farmers and time. But beneath the soil, rusted track links and jagged shrapnel still lie entangled together, eternal enemies at rest. This is the cold nature of war, as it does not care if you are an elite instructor or a raw recruit. In the eye of the storm, all are equal, and in the end, only the silence remains. If you found this deep dive into the realities of warfare compelling, please smash that like button and subscribe. Join us next time as we turn our gaze to the Eastern Front to witness another clash of steel and will. I am your strategy observer, and I will see you on the next battlefield.